Another weekly wrap up. Andres, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, guy, happy to be here.
Excellent. So we've got a couple of interesting stories today, starting off with Hygraph Series B. So why don't we start there?
Yeah, so feature story on the DXP Report this week was the Hygraph Series B. They raised 30 million to power the next generation of content management. That takes their total funding to 43.7 million. And this round was led by One Peak with some existing investors like OpenOcean and Square One participating again. And they plan to use the funds to support ongoing innovation, just kind of made the product better. And they also want to scale their go to market and focus a bit more on the North American market. Hygraph being like a Berlin based organization, so they've been catering a lot to Europe and surrounding areas. So some quotes from Michael Lukasic, CEO and co-founder at Hygraph. In the same way the headless CMS changed content distribution, Hygraph is disrupting the integration of content and data to enable the creation of new digital services and business models in the content economy. Our new funding round will allow us to further scale our business as we aim to do for content management what the likes of MuleSoft did for integration. We also got some quotes from David Klein and Tajana Cass. They're the co-founder and managing partner, respectively, at managing partner and director, respectively, at One Peak, who led the round. And they say, despite the rise of composable enterprise, many organizations are unable to unlock full value from their content. Hygraph solves the customization and integration challenges that continue to slow the creation of new or complex digital services at scale. We've been hugely impressed with Hygraph's strong and capital efficient growth trajectory and believe that its federated content platform presents a sizable market opportunity. One Peak is incredibly excited about the excellent Hygraph team and its founders in the next stage of explosive growth. One thing they mentioned there, federated content platform, that's Hygraph. It's unique to Hygraph, and they've been the ones to kind of introduce the concept of content federation, which enables organizations, companies using CMS to unify all their backend services into one universal content API and serve third-party or programmatically created content alongside editorial content.
Yeah, the Hygraph's definitely owning this content federation term or niche within a niche within a niche. I'm not sure how much we niche down at this point. But it's very interesting, and I feel like it was a great move from them to do this. We've spoken a couple of episodes back about how we need to see more headless CMSs positioning themselves differently or specializing in something, or essentially trying to set themselves apart from the crowd, right? Rather than just being a headless CMS with maybe slightly better UI UX or slightly better drag and drop or anything like that. And this is a perfect example of choosing something and owning it, right? So content federation, the way I like to look at this is like when headless CMS first come out or first sort of start to emerge, shall we say, front end agnosticism was what we had to get accustomed to, right? It hasn't got a front end. You can build the front end you want, or thanks to APIs, you can connect any existing front end somewhere else, and the headless CMS will deliver that content to any front end that you like, right? It was front end agnostic. What Hygraph's doing with content federation is basically saying we're back end agnostic in a sense that it can pull in any data or content or assets, again using APIs from any source without having to migrate or move that data from its from its place, right? That's the key there. So with other headless CMSs, you have to sometimes migrate that content in to have it accessible. Whereas Hygraph saying, hey, we can pull it from anywhere, we'll federate it from anywhere without touching it essentially. So yeah, I think it's a great move from them. I think it's great news for Hygraph, obviously. Series B, another 30 million in the account. And I'm excited to see where they go with this content federation niche that they have carved out for themselves.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing is, I think it's great to see vendors in the industry like continue to raise funds, particularly in this climate. I know last year, 2022, there was still a lot of funding in the CMS space, or headless space rather. But I was reading on Crunchbase News, and it says venture funding in European startups declined by 25% in 2022. So as compared to I think the peak at 2021. So you might see some lower pre-seed rounds. Like companies are still getting pre-seed rounds, Series A rounds, and but it's smaller amounts than many would have expected from before. But I think Hygraph is really they're bucking the trend with this solid Series B of 30 million, and it kind of shows the importance that we still have for modern content management. how crucial that is. And another interesting fact is like they haven't mentioned anything about AI. So like AI seems to be like the big thing. A lot of AI startups are getting a lot of funding, and AI has been creeping into the Hello space too. With a lot of these, a lot of vendors integrating ChatGPT and other tools to kind of make creating different types of content easier and faster for teams. Hygraph haven't done anything like that yet, but they're still able to secure that. So I think that's pretty good thing to know.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I'm trying to brainstorm in my head right now, like what if they're going down a content federation route, i.e., more back end, accessibility rather than like the chat GPT way of like generating content. It could be interesting to see, and this is like way above my pay grade, if you will. But it'd be interesting if like AI could come in and be like, okay, this company's got 17 different sources of data. We need to grab customer data. What's the most efficient way to grab it from these 17? Maybe there's the most efficient way to do it. That's faster, or that kind of thing. And AI will figure that out instantly for you and just work in the background to make sure that all 17 of your sources are giving you data or content assets in the most efficient way rather than going about it in an inefficient way maybe. But yeah, that's something that Hygraph will have to get back to me on. Let's move on to our next story, which is site core advocates jumping ship. What's happening over there?
Yeah, so one of the things featured in like something that caught our eye, this definitely caught our eye, was an open letter to the Sitecore community from Akshay Sura, and he's the founding partner at Konabos. They're like a leading digital agency, is a Sitecore partner, and I think Akshay himself was like pretty much one of the key drivers of like the Sitecore community at large. So this is a disclaimer is like he said that this is to his friends in the Sitecore community and not in any professional capacity. Basically, he talks about the fact that he feels that the Sitecore community has lost its way. I don't think that I think he said that to also mention that this isn't him that's moving away from Konabos or anything along those lines, but it's like his personal feelings on the Sitecore community. So Konabos digital agency, they're a Sitecore partner, but they've also got to work like Content and AI, Contentful, and some others. And Akshay, he's a 9-time Sitecore MVP. I think it was actually the one who started the Sitecore MVP trend. So some of the things he mentioned in this kind of piece they wrote: you've changed, I've changed, and so has the world. It's composable now, comprising much more than just Sitecore. I need to be with other communities and other platforms. A byproduct of all my work was the Sitecore MVP. I feel that over the years that has changed and it's become more of a box-ticking exercise, the only goal being the award rather than for the passion of sharing, pushing the platform's boundaries, and evolving everyone's knowledge. I have a confession to make. I've seen other platforms. I wanted to try Composable a while ago, but you weren't into it, so I started dating others. Seeing you come around now is nice, but it's all a bit late. And he's talking to, I think here he's definitely talking to the community, as he mentioned, but it's also alluding a bit to, I think, some of the changes that Sitecore themselves have made. He also posted this on LinkedIn, and in the LinkedIn post, it's the same letter. It's definitely a personal move, but I think based on some of the things that he's published, it seems that most of all the comments they were along the lines of they're sad to see him go and whatnot. But some people guessed out why he could be thinking like this, and some of the things they mentioned is the fact that the Magic Quadrant just came out, and Sitecore seems to be slowly like creeping down away from being like a leader more towards like a challenger or challenger in the quadrant compared to other vendors in space. Recently, in the last couple of years, they've been more about acquisitions, and despite these acquisitions, um, they seem to be a bit behind in every category. And the other thing is that it mentions the fact that it seems to be harder for these developers who are using Sitecore to work tools, and other platforms are more flexible, Hygraph, uniform content stack, etc. That seems to be where these are some of the guesses that some of the commenters had in the LinkedIn post.
Okay, so there was a few technical issues there, but I'm going to finish off my thoughts on this whole site core advocates jumping ship, Conabos, the open letter. when I first saw this, it was super like I was kind of stunned really because you know, as you mentioned, 9-time cycle MVP. This is like a person who is part of the furniture, if you will. I mean that in a nice way. So there was a lot of sort of shocked comments, but there was also not too much argumentation in the comments. You know, it was very much like, you're right type of thing. I don't think anyone said outright that you're right, but that was the vibe I got, was that people could kind of see this coming and people kind of understood his argument, right? And I think his first 2 or 3 sentences says it all, right? You've changed, I've changed. The world is composable now, comprising much more than just Sitecore, and I need to be in other communities and other platforms. And Andres, you and me, through our work at Wordify, we've seen and we've discussed with other Sitecore agencies and partners, and we know that this isn't like an isolated incident, right? There's other agencies out there who have been, Sitecore through and through for many, many years, and they and their customers are facing similar uncertainties. Sitecore's strategy was always quite risky, right? When they start to pivot into microservices or getting away from that sort of monolith legacy history, they're doing that with that monolith legacy history still very much in place. It's still very much, with the wheels turning, right? They've got multiple enterprises who are using that monolithic version of Sitecore, who've invested, a ton of money over the years and still currently investing into it. Many enterprises still migrating into Sitecore, legacy Sitecore. And so this strategy of sort of pivoting, and they pivoted quite hard. They invested a lot of money into the pivot. It raised a lot of eyebrows, right? It's like, well, we're sort of migrating into the old thing. Where does that leave us? The agencies having to answer awkward questions. The agencies don't have, the full roadmap in front of them necessarily. Not sure they can trust the roadmap either. At the same time, this whole composable Mac trend keeps trending, keeps growing, keeps attracting more funding, as we saw with Hygraph, despite the economic downturn. And so more and more Sitecore agencies, and I don't think it's limited to Sitecore, by the way. I think this is the same for other legacy monoliths, Adobe's, your Drupals. A lot of agencies are saying, okay, the landscape is changing, and either we're working with Sitecore, which is doing this pivot that we can't telegraph it, or we're with an Adobe or a Drupal who Drupal's doing their own sort of pivot, but again, it's not entirely in line with what a lot of enterprise customers are looking for right now, which is this sort of Mac composable thing. So a lot of agencies are saying, there's just too much uncertainty. We need to figure out, is being Sitecore only or Adobe only or Drupal only the right move for us going forward? And I'm getting the feeling more and more that the answer there is no, right? It's too risky to just remain, sticking with Sitecore or sticking with Drupal or sticking with Adobe as like their sort of bread and butter, because there needs to be more variety, right, in their sort of in the solutions they offer to enterprise customers. So that's what I think we're seeing. That's what I feel like this is like. It's bubbled to the surface, but there's a lot bubbling under the surface, right? So yeah, it's surprising they became public like this, but at the same time, not surprising at all. So I feel like we're going to see more of it. I feel like the more we talk to Sitecore agencies, the more we hear about that. So yeah, I feel like it's just part and parcel of this sort of paradigm shift that we're seeing. I'm not sure if we're still having technical issues. Andres, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I think that was fine then. Okay, I think we covered everything we want to cover. I'm definitely going to be keeping tabs on this whole Conobo situation and seeing if it starts a bit of a trend with other Sitecore agencies coming out and saying, hey, we're also building partnerships outside, broadening our horizons. And I think there was one LinkedIn comment that said, there's a lot of Sitecore agencies who are sort of building in the dark, right? Building new partnerships in the dark and that kind of thing. Maybe retraining or upskilling, however you look at it, their teams to work with in this case, content.ai. It could be any of the other sort of businesses out there. So I think this is a real trend that's bubbling away under the surface essentially. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes. But over the next 12 to 24 months, I can see this happening, a lot more. So let's see how that goes. Okay, Andres, that was a tough one considering our technical issues, but we continued anyway. Thank you for your time, and next week we'll go again.